community listening session on police accountability and public safety. First of all, I want to thank all of the public here. Really appreciate you guys coming out and showing support, and just here to listen. Really appreciate that. Our goal of the listening session today is really to create a positive dialogue and offer some insight from some local experts and police officers. As with other forums that we've hosted in the past, our goal is to really educate the public on some of the issues at hand and offer an opportunity to comment and speak about things that concern you as the citizens of Maplewood and surrounding areas. So, kind of outlined before, you can submit questions to Karen. She's got kind of an area over there, so submit questions, and we hope that we can go through some, if not all, questions here to the speakers. Also want to kind of quick talk about some ground rules. Really want you to listen to what's being said in this room. We all have preconceived notions about many different topics, but we really want to make sure that we're listening and really being present in the meeting and listening to what our speakers and what the other people in the audience are saying. If there's a question, feel free to ask for a clarification. We do want to be clear, and maybe we're all human, we all make mistakes, so give us a chance to just kind of make up for our mistakes, basically. So if there's a specific complaint of wrongdoing by a Maplewood officer, Karen and some of us have some specific complaint forms, and Chief can kind of go through that more. But basically, if there's a specific concern, we ask that you fill out a complaint form that we have available. Practice civility, really just trying to be civil in this whole process as best we can, and that would be wonderful. So, and then lastly, if you have any specific ideas or thoughts about Maplewood policies or community safety that can be improved, that's what this is for, and we'd love to bring those forward and give suggestions at this time. So that would be great. So the first thing I'd like is we're just going to kind of intro the panel of speakers that we have. They're just going to give a short bio of who they are and why we asked them to be here. And then we will, afterwards, we will go through a question period. So, all right, let's start with Sean, if you don't mind. Just kind of give a bio of who you are and what you do around here.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Sean Moore, and I am a church planter. I am the pastor of the Beloved Church. We meet in Maplewood. Currently, we are meeting in Christ United Church on Hudson Place. I'm a former police officer for the city of Brooklyn Center. Before that, I worked at Mall of America as a verbal judo and a defensive tactics instructor. I spent 4 years in the military as a security officer and also a hand-to-hand combat instructor. I was asked to show up here today because I also teach at Bethel University. I teach culture competency, and so I have experience with law enforcement and culture anthropology, and I'm a community member because my church is here and I worship in this city.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Next, we'll just go to Chief Schnell.
I'm Paul Schnell, currently the Chief of Police here from Maplewood. Been here relatively short time, about 1.5 years. And prior to that, served as police chief in Hastings for 3 years, St. Paul for 12 years before that, and then nearly 8 years as a deputy sheriff in Carver County. My background is in social work, and which ultimately led me into police work, and have had also do some construction, have had a good opportunity to co-instruct with panels on the far end here. You'll hear from in a second. But I look forward to this type of session and opportunity to hear what people think about how we improve not only what happens at Maplewood, but how do we improve policing everywhere. Safety is a big concern for everyone, and how do we make that better?
Great. All right, Jason.
Good evening. My name is Jason Soul. My background is a little more complicated in explaining. I just grew up making poor decisions, so I grew up learning the wrong side of the law, and I'm grateful to be able to sit on the panel with such great people, because I made poor decisions that landed me in a number of correctional facilities, but I'm proud to say I was able to climb out of those positions and be an asset to the community. So I travel the country having tough discussions. I'm a national consultant, a national trainer. I'm finishing on my PhD in criminal justice, and like Paul said, Paul actually helped me be a better person overall. You know, I don't think I've shared that with many of you, but if any police chief can do any great amount of work for a city, I believe in Paul. Like, he just kind of breezed past the fact that he has a social work background and he's a police officer. He just kind of blew over that. But I found that remarkable, and anything he's a part of and he needs my help, I'm willing to assist. So I'm grateful to be here tonight, and I hope to add something significant to this discussion.
Great. Our last speaker just had a conflict, so she'll be arriving shortly, but Marie is going to give a quick kind of bio of who she is when she does make it here. So.
Oh, right now? Yeah. I'm sorry, my bad. Martha Barella, she is a community organizer, a community advocate. She has a long history working with youth. She's a youth development professional. I have the pleasure of working with her and a friend of mine, but working on hard issues with the community police on the west side of St. Paul. So she's no stranger to this. She's definitely somebody at this table to represent disproportionate communities, but also it's nice to see a fellow Latina come in and get her stage, her stage presence. So once she gets here, she can probably tell you better than I who she is, but she's a great person, so can't wait till she comes.
Well, great. So that's kind of our speakers here tonight. We were just kind of joking right before it started. We don't necessarily have an exact question around what we're trying to do here, but we wanted to keep it broad so that we can really cover a lot of wide range of topics. So I don't know if maybe we could do a quick recap of our last meeting. It really started a good discussion, and which really was the reason that we wanted to convey this forum. We had some good discussion around many different topics that were going on. So I don't know if John or Sarah have another idea that we could kind of kick off with some good questions to the council, or.
One of the main things we were trying to do is have the opportunity for people to get together so we have a chance to know each other a little bit. So when there is an issue that comes up, it's easier for us to have some kind of dialogue with one another. So just a way to get connected, meeting each other, hearing about what the police and other community members are doing to work well together. And I think there's very positive things going on in Maplewood, and that we're just having this forum, and there's been some other forums recently at high schools and that kind of thing too. So I think it reflects a desire for all of us to work well together and get to know each other, and also be willing to take some risks and address some of those tough issues when they come up.
I don't have much specific to add to that, but I'd be interested in knowing if any of the speakers have opening comments, and Nate, whether we're going to afford them an opportunity to reflect on the invitation that they got here this evening.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great way to start here. So how about we give 5 minutes to each panelist to try to just kind of talk about their perspective on the issues related to the topic that we're speaking on. So I don't know if anyone would like to go first.
Sure. Okay, so this is working. Okay, I think they're gonna lean into this. So currently, I see myself as a community leader when it comes to spiritual endeavors that also transcend into actual practice of navigating one's life. Being a former police officer, I'm always curious what it means when someone says, how do we hold law enforcement officials accountable? And so when you use the word accountability, you're talking about a standard. And so then what is that standard that we are referring to? And then how do we measure whether or not it's being reached or not? And so I think that the key for this is education. And I think that in all the years of doing security, doing law enforcement, I was never required to take a class on diversity or culture anthropology or engaging the other. Of course, there was tactics, Minnesota State statute, use of force, driving, but never a class that said this is how you engage in the otherness. Now, as I'm finishing up my doctorate in social transformation, as a culture anthropologist, we all have a worldview in which we navigate our reality. We all see the world a particular way. And most of us aren't raised to see that worldview as being wrong or incorrect. This is the way we navigate our reality. And so when we engage something that's different, we have to put it into a category. And if I have not experienced that before, the limitations of my categories almost forced me to put it into a particular box. And so it becomes very easy for me to say yes and no, up and down, left and right, and not to see the gray area of things. And so I think that the key for accountability for community members and for law enforcement has to do with education. Now, as an educator, it's important that we understand what it is, the job of law enforcement. I remember the very first day I told my mom, yeah, I'm going to go into law enforcement. My mom said, what are you talking about? That's crazy talk. And then she wanted to tell me that black people don't become police officers. She was very concerned for me. And I said, well, I think that this is what I'm called to do, and I want to serve and protect. And so I went on and did so. But it's the training that's so important. And so as a hand-to-hand combat instructor, as a professor, the way in which you literally navigate your reality when you're under stress relates back to how you've been trained. Training is everything. And so for me, I think accountability is to ask the question of what types of training endeavors are we sending our law enforcement officials into and through. But not only is it a law enforcement issue or a police issue, it's also a community issue, right? And so many times when I was a police officer, I'd have people ask me questions in which they had no clue what I actually did for a living. They didn't actually know what I did. The police shows and movies don't do a good job of actually dealing with what does it mean to be a person who's 23 or 24 in a squad car with that major responsibility of protecting and serving a neighborhood. It's not easy, it's stressful. Cops have a high rate of divorce, alcoholism, and mental health issues because of the stress that goes on. And so for me, I think that the key of this accountability will be like what's said over here, is how do we get to know each other? And I'm a firm believer that if you can see the humanity in somebody, it's hard to do them wrong, okay? And so that doesn't mean that we're not going to enforce rules and policies and sanctions, but for me, I think the key is education. How are we educating our community members to understand what it means to do the job of law enforcement? And how are we training our law enforcement officials who are going through the academy how to deal with difference? Because we have that lens, and that lens is almost shaped by your enculturation. And the enculturation in which you're navigating tells you what's right and wrong. And sometimes when we see something that's different, we'll give that a category of that's wrong when it's just different. And so I hear lots of people say the law is blind, and I would agree with that, but it can be enforced with color. And that's important to understand, that when we do the job, or when it's being done, that we're being as objective as we possibly can when it comes to an engagement.
Great, thank you. Jason?
Yeah. We look across the country, we see a large number of protests, we see a large number of, we see violence, we see a lot of different things. We hear Black Lives Matter, we hear All Lives Matter, we hear police shootings had nothing to do with race. We believe certain things were strictly based on racial or seen through a racial lens. So we're all over the place as far as, you know, what we thinking is creating a high level of divisiveness. Now, as she stated, relationships are primary. Everything else is derivative. But we got to understand, for certain communities, the police have just been seen as oppressors. We have to acknowledge that history. We have to. Like, if we want to really have honest conversations and speak on truth, let's be fair. Let's be honest. Let's be able to bring our biases to the table, because I'm very open about the biases I hold. I grew up with all sorts of anti-gay sentiments. And I'm embarrassed to say that, but I'm honest about it because I want to do things about it. I don't want to look at someone who's transgender as different to where I treat them different in any kind of way. So I give myself this self-analysis all of the time. But we got to be honest. And I'm not sure how many people really want to be honest. So if we're going to hold police accountable, what does that look like? Does that mean more meetings? Does that mean more forums? Does that mean more conversations? Does that mean citizens know what the grievance process looks like? What does that really mean? Because I see a ton of people saying, yeah, let's meet. Well, what are we really getting accomplished? So today I'm here to be solution-based. What are we really going to do to make sure police are held accountable? What are we willing to sacrifice to make sure that happens? Are we willing to sacrifice time? Are we willing to deal with our discomfort? Are we willing to acknowledge our own biases towards others? Or are we just going to have the rhetoric? So we got to be honest about this. Let's not just show up and say we did community education. Or let's not just say, yeah, we tried or made an effort at it. Let's really do it, because that's what's needed right now. The world needs healing. It really does. And we can start it in this room if we're open and honest about what we want to get accomplished.
Thanks, Jason. I think, unless, hello, Martha, welcome. If you're ready, if you wanted to give a quick bio of yourself, and then we're just doing a 5-minute kind of opening about your thoughts around this accountability in public safety.
Hello everyone, my name is Martha Varela. By trade, I am a youth development professional. I received my education, my degree from the University of Minnesota. So my heart and my passion lies with the youth in the community. Most recently, I was the executive director of the Westside Safe Neighborhood Council in St. Paul, where we were a very unique group of community individuals that worked to mediate everything from conflict issues, but then also would come together to celebrate. So I'm here to kind of also build on that hope. And I have been a testament to the fact that it can be done. Neighbors like yourself can actually see results, and thinking outside the box may not be as hard as we may think it does, but I certainly agree with what I just heard. I apologize for coming late. But I also am here to kind of focus on leadership development, thinking outside of the box, and working together. Because the finger pointing that we've been seeing recently in the media, in the news, is not going to really get us anywhere. And so I'm hopeful with small groups of individuals that I have worked with in my past that we can make some good things happen. But again, it does take that honesty, as you mentioned, to really say, I want to be a part of the solution. So currently I own a business in St. Paul. I coach with a local booster organization. So I try to stay busy and actually put that action into place. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Last, Paula, if you could give some comments as well.
Thanks. I think it's positive to talk about the solution. I'm going to try and be a little bit broad in terms of some of the kind of comments about policing in general. And there's an old kind of saying that communities get the kind of policing that they demand. And I think one of the things that I heard in the comments is sometimes the feeling has been, and certainly I think history is reflective of the fact, is that sometimes in some situations those in power, I think, deliver the kind of policing that they felt others deserved. And ultimately, there's been a history of some of those problems in our country. And I think, as Jason points out, we need to recognize those realities. I certainly think that one of the things that happens, and I would be remiss that obviously we see the world in the lens, as Sean talked about, of the worldview that we have, and certainly I come from a worldview that's reflective of the skin color I have, the fact that I'm a middle-aged, I like to say slightly overweight white guy, the reality is I'm also a police officer, and I have to see the world from that vantage point. I have certainly seen police officers at times when they've been at their worst, and I can tell you that many, many times I've seen police officers do things that were phenomenal and were at their best. And those are the things that I think I feel proud of in policing. And I think to not recognize the fact that we face significant challenges around issues of public trust between the police and the community, and it's certainly in communities of color and communities that are more disadvantaged. But we're seeing, I think, a time right now where the police are facing scrutiny from a whole spectrum of the swath of the community because they're concerned about trust. You know, I think at the end of the day, we need to recognize from a law enforcement standpoint where our authority comes from. And our authority comes from this, I don't want to be too kind of heady, but this applied social contract that says that, you know, we as in a community who want safety and security give up just small amounts of our ultimate liberty for the good of the whole. And we charge a certain segment of the population. All people have a responsibility, but a certain segment of the population are paid to do this. And I don't think, and I didn't hear one person up here say we should get rid of police and we should get rid of law enforcement and that the laws are unimportant, because I don't think that's the reality. In any community I've ever worked in, every community has wanted safety and security for their kids and for the good and welfare of their families. I think we need to go back to looking at our connections and our responsibilities as it relates to how we deliver police services in the community. We need to, when you look at the disparate outcomes, we need to be honest about the fact that the outcomes are disparate, that there are segments of the community who experience policing in ways that others do not. I mean, it would be dishonest not to say that's the reality. And so the question then becomes, how do we make meaning of that? And I think that becomes an important task, not just for the police, but for everyone. What are the rules that the community demands around how their police will deliver services in the community? And there's a wide range of opinion about that, we all know. But what's reasonable and fair and balanced? How do we expect our police officers to maintain some sense of personal safety and community safety, and at the same time not over-respond to a given situation? And we need to find some answers to those challenges. But as I think was said, I remain optimistic that there is an opportunity for those small solutions to be found and small steps. And if I had one goal or wish tonight, that there would be 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 things that would come from the people here that would ultimately help me and the members of our police department and our profession be able to take some steps that might build more trust and improve policing for those who demand it.
Great. Well, before we go to questions from the audience, just wondering if any of the speakers had any comments or questions back to each other, or any of the other commissioners had any questions for the speakers at this time.
I'd like to acknowledge Marie's efforts to put this together this evening. And Marie, if you'd like to speak to why you chose the topic in the panel this evening and what the passion is that brought this together for you and for all of us here tonight. And the backdrop, while Marie is collecting her thoughts for just a second there, the backdrop to this, as many people know, back in November and December, there were a rash of killings, of deaths of black men at the hands of law enforcement, including Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Eric Garner in New York City, and 12-year-old Tamir Rice in Cleveland. This all happened in rather rapid succession. So one of the questions that I would like to ask the panel members and Marie to speak to is, what was your reaction when these deaths were unfolding? And why do you think that they sparked the nationwide protests that we saw all over this country during November and December?
Thanks, John, for putting me on the spot. Yeah, we had a discussion last meeting about police and police accountability, public safety. I grew up in St. Paul, grew up around violence in the inner city, grew up in the projects. People would say low-income housing, ghetto, whatever. Violence was the norm, and when you grow up in it, you kind of you're used to it. You don't, shots fired, you don't, it's kind of like, you know, the rain, it's just raining, shots are just being fired. That's the way it is. I have a passion about it because, you know, I've seen it my whole life, and very few people that are in those positions are able to make it out of it and become somebody to advocate against violence. And I really came into it about 3 years ago, working with Martha on the West Side Safe and being a community advocate. When people are having an issue with drug dealing or prostitution, gang members, landlords, community infighting, they come to us. And also if they had a problem with police, because let's be real, nobody wants to go to police. You know, it's very intimidating, you're scared, let's not talk about your experiences. And I think in our last session, we started talking more about what recently has been happening. It's not like it just happened. You know, police and the community, it's been for decades and if not centuries. The way people are policed, you know, we talk about community policing, but actually it's police patrolling and oppressing the community. And if we don't have this dialogue, a real dialogue, so I want you guys to bring it, don't sugarcoat anything, nothing to, sure, this is fine. That's not what this is for. I want you to get in it. And I want you to talk about it because this subject is raw, people are dying, people are scared, and how are we gonna work together? Like Martha said, if we're pointing the fingers. We have to create solutions, hold people accountable, our community accountable, our police accountable. It's a group effort, it's a team effort. And so I hope that we really think of some goals like Chief Schnell said, that we can come up with, and you know, Jason can't say, you know, said some great things about Schnell too. I mean, I love him. I think, you know, if every police chief could be like him, wow, what our community would be like. I'm not here to put him on a soapbox, I'm not. It's just being around law enforcement, working with law enforcement, it's very rare that you have a police chief that says, yeah, let's talk about it. Because I don't see any other police chief here. I don't see no St. Paul, and I'm willing to call him out because I don't care. I don't see the sheriff. I don't see anybody here. So I thank you, Chief, for being here because it's important that police, all police, not just Maplewood, we're talking about police-wide. This isn't about Maplewood police. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about police in general and law enforcement in general. And how can we kind of climb out of that hole of it's your fault, it's my fault. What can we do? What solutions? What can we pull together? Because between a lot of us, I think we've come through good decisions. And where can we look to get those ideas and make them into reality? So I hope we really take this time and really, like I said, get in it. Don't be soft. You know, talk, like I know you guys can talk. Thank you.
Well, since you put it that way, I try to, you know, I do try to soften it up because there's a stigma of me being an African-American man talking about this topic. So I have to be careful and mindful that I might reinforce a stereotype. So I'm always cognizant of who's in the room. I don't want to let my passion cloud my intellect on the subject matter, so I'm very careful. And, you know, truthfully, I don't live in Maplewood, so, you know, I go back to, you know, my community after all of this done, so I definitely don't want to spark something really heated and then go back to my area and leave you guys.
We'll find where you live.
Okay. So I don't want to do that, but, you know, when I seen, you know, Ferguson, you know, initially my mind said, I got to go there. And that's what I did. You know, I had to go to the place where Mike Brown was killed so I can feel what it's like to be in that place, because of my poor decision making, I've had firearms pulled on me for law enforcement, you know, on many occasions, but that was, you know, due to some of my own stuff. And when I went there and saw where he laid for 4.5 hours, I don't care if it was legal or illegal, it was definitely preventable. So regardless of whether you say he was a criminal, he stole cigarettes, doesn't matter. How he was handled, how all those shots was fired, sparked something in everyone. If you think back through history, when Emmett Till was killed, it sparked the civil rights movement. He was 14 years old, coming from Chicago to the South. Tongue ripped out, eye knocked out his head, bullet to the head, and his mom had an open casket funeral so the world could see what was happening. We gotta be honest about this thing. There's a bigger system in place. There's a bigger system. We give police a lot of stuff, but they're just a microcosm of a bigger system that has been put in place to keep people enslaved, to keep people entrenched in struggle. I can't possibly be the best I can be if I'm constantly in turmoil, if you constantly redline communities and say I can only be here, if you only put me in places that deal with me as a subject of inferiority. I can't thrive in that. I can't. So it's like, we look at some of, you know, because I see the conversation always steering into black on black crime. Like, why are you going to get mad and protest now? Why are, you know, people from the Hispanic community protesting now? It's like, we felt voiceless. Protests are the voice of the unheard. So it's like, for me, I have to be on these forums because this is my life. I have cousins, I have nephews, I have people I care about, and we haven't been able to have dialogue with police officers. That's why I was grateful when Paul Schnell said he wanted to co-teach with me. And we were able to have that dialogue in front of students so we could spread it out, so we could understand we can talk about these things, we can be passionate, and then we can create solutions to make our communities better. And what I'm seeing in the country now doesn't make me optimistic. You know, I'm glad people are seeing that, you know, it's been shifted one way for a significant amount of time. But where are the solutions? We have a ton of civil action. We have a ton of rallies. We have a ton of people saying, you guys think it's all about race. Get over it. 2015, black president, keep moving. And we're not having needed discussion. So I'm hoping that we can create a space for dialogue, deliberative dialogue, where we can actually say, okay, I've made mistakes. I'm imperfect. I've had transgressions. Now I'm willing to bring my baggage to the table so you can help me understand where I'm getting it wrong, and I can help you understand where you're getting it wrong. But there have to be open lines of communication. It can't be heavy-handed where you have power and authority, and I'm just this small minion trying to, you know, voice my concerns to you, and you're not hearing me. So if we could open up the dialogue and have open lines of communication, we can actually set a standard. Maplewood can be the first to actually say, this is what we're doing, and everybody else can follow, because it's not happening.
Thank you. So the way I define power, power is the means to do something. Okay? It's the means to do something. So when I pick this up, I'm demonstrating power over this cup. Authority is the right to give me the power to do something. Whenever you have people who don't have power, the means to do something, or the authority to do something, they become oppressed. And when that becomes internalized, it literally begins to manifest itself in very negative ways. This idea of it just being a law enforcement issue is not the case at all. 1619 in this country, you have the beginning of slavery. Right? It doesn't end on the paper book or on paper until 1964. Right? And so whenever you continue to put a group of individuals in the same process over and over and over and over again, you create a culture of rights, rituals, traditions, customs, and habits. They get enforcement rewards and sanctions. And so I believe that when you say that we need to have conversations about power and authority, until you have the issue of power and authority settled, you really can't have conversations on equal footing. Right? You really can't. It'll always be an uphill battle when it comes to having these conversations. And if conversations are the very beginning of a critical praxis, which we reflect upon and then do, then we're always going to be shorthanded. I do think that conversations like that are needed, but then the question, like you were saying, is what's next? What's actually going to be done? There are a couple of terms. One is sabona. It means I see you and I see your full humanity. And until we can see your full humanity, we can't talk about power and authority. And then there's Ubuntu. I am because we are. Without Ubuntu, you can't have community building. And so, yes, conversations are well, but then the question becomes, what are the real-life practices or practices that we are going to engage in to create systemic change to move us forward?
I would just like to kind of comment on what I felt and what I saw when I seen and kind of watched the news replay over and over what happened in Ferguson and what happened in New York City. And I know that I've been just sort of trying to educate myself on learning about the rest of the murders that are happening. I just saw another one today about a Tampa Bay Police Department that killed an innocent man, and again, without the specifics. But this isn't new. I guess when I saw it, I was angry, I was upset, I was furious, I was afraid, but I wasn't surprised because I have witnessed things that I could probably write a book about. It did land me kind of an opportunity to position myself in the community that I live in a good place to kind of talk openly and honestly with both sides. And as a mediator, that brought me great power. And so I had a chance to kind of experience that on both sides of the fence. But one thing I do remember, and it's what keeps me hopeful, is the experiences that I have had with positive members of law enforcement, for example, Paul Schnell. I will never forget the day that I saw you in the back of my driveway when you were well aware of what was going on with the gang violence at that time. And that one experience, you know, I may not have known you very well, but just to see a white man say, number one, I'm in tune to what's going on. I care because I'm here. I just didn't get called here. I'm here to kind of pay attention to what's going on. But thirdly, to offer your help and assistance to me was very shocking. Now, that to me meant that you're not the only one. There should be others. And I began to teach folks how to network with individuals like yourself so that when they do run into a problem, there's an alternate route for a solution. So those are the things that kind of, in those bad instances, kind of encouraged me to keep moving forward with a solution. And the networking piece is the key for me because we each are responsible. We each daily have to contribute to this change and this dynamic shift. It's not going to happen magically by one group, whether it's a group of law enforcement officials, whether it's a group of political officials. It starts with you and I. And that's mentoring youth that we see that live next door, talking to neighbors, connecting with neighbors, just to, like you mentioned, kind of the humanness of it, knowing each other. St. Paul is very unique when you think about all of the good things that we have to offer, and I know Maplewood's a suburb, but kind of in thinking back to my childhood growing up, I contribute all of the successes that I have to the diversity of St. Paul. And we have to start taking ownership, much like the West Side community does. When crap hits the fan over there, they have to answer to us, no matter what skin color we have, no matter what our political influence is, no matter what our income levels are. That is our community, and we take ownership of that community. And when police do not respond in ways that we find are appropriate, we call them out on the carpet. And that's how it's always been. I've learned that from my neighborhood. but it's something that other neighborhoods have to take accountability for and have to participate in. And it starts with each and every one of you on an individual level. There are very small things that you can do on a day-to-day basis that contribute to that larger group influence. And you know, it is unfortunate to see and hear the continuation of some of these violent acts of crime, but on the other side of the spectrum, I feel sorry for police officers. I don't think that they have all of the skill sets that they need when they're hired on. I think that they mean well and they may want to truly become a police officer, but there are certain skill sets that you need: conflict resolution, mediation. And I had the opportunity to sit on the hiring committee a couple years back with the St. Paul Police Department, where I interviewed and participated in the interview process for the future police department. And I was stunned at some of the answers. And I'll be honest, one of the questions was about conflict resolution. 4 out of the 5 individuals talked about specific times where they actually put their hands on people. Now, if I asked anybody out here, give me an example of a time where you used conflict resolution and you told me an example of when you put your hands on someone, that would be very depressing. Now, do we learn conflict resolution in school? Is that taught in the police academy? Is it something that should be supplemented yearly as part of the training? Yes. So there's lots of potential solutions that we can kind of come up with and look at for this kind of situation that we're seeing kind of involving the law enforcement. So I have a lot of mixed emotions about what I saw, but I wasn't surprised because unfortunately this is something that I have seen in my day-to-day, and I'm hopeful that, again, we'll kind of call it out and talk about solutions.
I want to say something about the training. As a former police officer, again, going through skills, going through the education, getting my associates in law enforcement, then a bachelor's, master's, and so on. But again, and I agree with you, the training is important. Went through skills, went through shooting, went through driving, went through state statutes, went through hand-to-hand combat, went through all those things. At no point did I have a class on culture competency, conflict resolution. None of those things took place. Then I went through FTO, and the FTO process was a senior officer enculturating me to the job. And so if that person didn't have culture competency, if that person didn't have those skills, then they weren't passed along. The skills of engaging in other people does not exist, and I think that the skills in which we do use, like I was there for 3.5 years, and at no point in time did I ever pull my weapon out and fire at somebody. The idea of all the technical driving and all, even in the military, being in the Navy, doing law enforcement. And so the skills that would always put me in front of someone different to engage in newness, I didn't get trained. It was kind of an expectation that I would have already known these things. Now, being raised in a diverse neighborhood, South Minneapolis, being in the military, gave me some enculturation of what does it mean to engage in difference. But as a trainer, and I go and I train different law enforcement agencies, I too am amazed on the level of engagement outside of what you're getting in school. And maybe it's changed. I'm not sure what the 4-year degree requirement now requires, but I was not ever asked to engage in or take an extracurricular class on what does it mean to engage otherness. And I think the issue that we have now, or the phenomena, we have what's called globalization. Our neighborhoods are becoming more and more diverse overnight. The world is coming here. And so if you grew up in a small suburb somewhere, that's not a bad thing. But then we give you a uniform and a badge, and we ask you to reinforce laws, and we ask you to be able to use deadly force based upon a subjective understanding of what's in front of you. You have no choice but to respond to the stimuli based upon your enculturation. And so when people say the person looked possessed, or they looked, well, of course, if that's what you understand when you look at when people get upset or angry, then that makes complete sense. For me, it goes back to proper training. I don't know if all the skills that are required to do the job outside of putting handcuffs on people are being given. And until we are able to do that, it's kind of this machine that continues to produce the same kind of cookie over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if you dip it in chocolate frosting or strawberry frosting. If the machine continues to pump out the same type of cookie, you're going to get the same type of thing. And I think we need to go back to our academies, to the FTOs, to the training, and say, are we literally giving you the skills to do the job, or are we giving you the skills to be an agency of just enforcement and not community engagement? I think that's the key. Do we see ourselves as agents to help develop the community, or do we see ourselves as those who our job is just to put away the negative element behind closed doors somewhere?
Really quickly, I know we got to get to questions, and I definitely want to be able to do that. We also need a discussion on masculinity. Because if you look at the shootings, it's usually white male, black or brown person. A lot of women officers have great de-escalation skills, where they can talk someone down without having to use all of that excessive force. So we got to be able to be honest. What are people taught about what it means to be a man? Because women are constantly getting screwed. Sexism is still alive and well, and we overlook it. These shootings are predominantly males, men. So what are women doing that's different? They know how to de-escalate. They can talk you down. I mean, it's a skill that's been learned throughout their lifetime, being able to talk through differences because of the element of physicality. So we got to be able to talk about masculinity. What are we teaching people in terms of masculinity, and what does that look like when you have power? Is that trumped up to where now you more of a man or you more masculine? We got to be able to have these discussions where it's broader to where it goes into splinter conversations, but we must look at the issue. These are white officers killing black and brown people. I flew out to Santa Rosa, California back in June because I heard of a story of Andy Lopez, a kid who was shot 11 times by law enforcement before his body even hit the ground. Didn't get any media attention. But if you look up Andy Lopez and his story, he was a kid who got in trouble. He did have issues. He did have things going on. But for him to be killed the way he was killed, I knew I had a great job on my hands, a great task that I didn't know that I would be able to do. And Maria Hess, who's the founder of Humanidad, brought me out there to heal this community. And I worked my magic, and I talked to people. I brought in officers. I brought the community in, and it went well. But without that dialogue, we form our own perceptions, and we make it our reality. We keep those messages ingrained, and sometimes we racially socialize our children. So we got to be cognizant of what we're actually here to do. But I'm ready to go into the solutions. I'm feel myself getting pumped up, so I'm gonna slow down right now.
All right. I don't know if Chief, if you wanted to respond at all to John's question or any of the other topics.
I guess I would just say, I think when I saw what happened in New York, when I saw what happened in Ferguson, I think there's just no. I knew that it would have significant implications for law enforcement, no matter where you were. I think I had a little bit of that sense. And I saw this certainly in the discussions I heard from officers both here and elsewhere about what it meant to feel like they were at the tip of the spear and in some cases hated. I worried about how do we navigate through this situation, I thought about how it was that I would respond if a situation like this happened in our community. I learned, I think, some lessons from those things. We started to have some discussions internally about what it meant relative to the practices and some of the strategies we have, and not that they're wholly different than anywhere else, but we started to look at, are there things, being solution focused, are there things that we start to put in place in the way we train and the things we talk about that ultimately lead us to a place where we can slow down some of these situations. perhaps, and keep everyone safe, the officer as well as the people we're engaging with. I mean, it's troubling and it's worrisome, and it doesn't matter what size community you're in, big, small. The reality is we have to be concerned about it. We have to be, and it called in question in a significant way. That's it.
Great, thank you. Before we get to questions, I just want to make a quick note that we will be ending at 8:30. So we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can, but just be mindful of everyone's time. We're going to be closing up at 8:30 or right around there. So any other comments from any of the commissioners? Otherwise, we'll move to some questions.
Nate, I'd like to suggest that we give each one of the panel members a few minutes for closing comments, because I think there are going to probably be more questions that come out over the next half hour, and that the panel members all get an opportunity to make sure that they have a chance to describe the problems before we get to a discussion about solutions. If we haven't gotten all the, and of course, discussion of the problems could be extensive, but hoping that in addition to the great comments that have already been expressed, that if any of the panel members would like to take a minute to describe any problems that haven't already been identified, I might suggest that we have an opportunity to make sure we have a good description of the problems, and as we move to the questions that are coming from the audience, I think probably some additional questions will identify problems.
Okay. Anyone want to start, or start with?
The first question is, what will the police department do in order to stop police brutality?
I assume that one's for me. I think there are, there are clearly, I think we need to make sure that we have good oversight. We have clear rules. We have clear expectations, that those expectations, again, communities get the kind of policing they demand, and we recognize that there are going to be times when officers are going to need to use force. We recognize that. That's the reality of the world. We need to be restrained in the use of that force. We need to do everything we can to reduce it. So specifically, what we look at here is we're increasing and thinking about the way we train. Law enforcement typically will do training where we will spend a chunk of time doing defensive tactics. It's the kind of things where it's handcuffing and all those types of things that we would do. That's a training day. We will go to the range multiple times a year and do firearms training. All these things are segmented. And one of the things that's been happening for about the last year here is we've been trying to tie firearms and use of and kind of the use of force, the kind of the more typical kind of tactics that we might use, physical tactics. And now we're really adding as part of this verbal stuff. And that has really been key. It's not, we don't want to do these things in a vacuum. That when we train, we tie all of them together, because ultimately what ends up happening, that's the reality of the encounter that officers are facing. So how do we make sure that we're applying really good verbal skills and de-escalation tactics to that scenario or that situation, including the consideration of leaving the area, of a kind of a tactical retreat, of how do we contain and keep people safe, but stepping back. And that's contrary to the way that law enforcement has been trained. So we really need to take a look at this stuff. If we can keep the community safe by stepping back, then we should do that. Now, over the course of our recent history since Columbine, we've changed tactics where we go in and we address far more quickly. And that makes sense in some of those situations. But in many situations, we can retreat and I think achieve far better outcomes. But we need to train and have that become part of the continuum of the way we respond. And so in our agency, that's been one of the things that we are focusing on in terms of just thinking about the way we train and how that matches to the encounters that our officers are regularly having in the community.
I would just like to add a couple things to that. I also would like to see, Paul, some sort of system put in place for, and I don't want to say good cop, bad cop, but maybe when a cop doesn't make the best choice or use the best choice in terms of handling a situation, that there is some sort of anonymous mechanism set in place in the department where if other officers have an issue with one particular officer that has a history or maybe just in that present moment a pattern of using excessive force or maybe not the best of choices, that can be done in an anonymous and a professional way that doesn't jeopardize the safety or kind of integrity of the rest of the department. And I think if those sort of things are looked at, it might encourage more people to hold each other accountable within the department, but also to hold each other accountable. If there's a system in place that the big brother is looking over my shoulder and and it may be a way to kind of catch things early before you got an officer out there at his wit's end and, heaven forbid, it's a mental health issue and he doesn't have, or he or she doesn't have that background to kind of assess or mediate that situation, that you are kind of already aware that this particular officer may need some extra support or assistance. Because if you think about the level of issues that officers have to deal with on a day-to-day, it can be a lonely world out there when it's just you kind of thinking about, what's going on. And so that could kind of look at getting more support to that officer when they need it, but also kind of encouraging everyone to be accountable for each other within the department.
I appreciate that. I think that's a very worthwhile suggestion.
And just to kind of add to that also for the third one, another add-on, I think that there are studies out there that are coming out now that are showing that the lower an individual has in physical fitness, most likely they're going to overcompensate when using force to gain control. And so higher standards in fitness would be something that I think would also be appropriate. But also mandatory video cams, mandatory body cams, and also recording devices that automatically turn on whenever the lights go on or stop, so that we have more of these recordings. I think the reason why people are kind of up in arms is because the myth of what we believe is going on is now being seen on YouTube and video recorders and cell phones. And so the idea that people not being able to see these things are now being captured and put online hours afterwards. And so if we're going to say that we have people who are going to be civil servants, then the concept of being second guessed and being scrutinized and being videotaped and being audio taped should just come along with the job. And so if you're going to do this job, having your stuff being recorded and videoed shouldn't be an issue.
All right.
Okay, to be able to walk away from this meeting today with specific actions to build trust and improve policing and public safety in Maplewood, it would be helpful to have a better understanding of what are the current issues with police accountability and public safety in Maplewood, or are we just talking generally about police accountability in our country and problems across the country? Follow-up question. I'm here from Arlington Hills United Methodist Church in Maplewood, and we would like to help in any way we can. As Martha indicated, individuals can make a difference. Are there things we could do to make a difference in our community?
Let me just say that I think when we look at kind of complaint stuff and the level of complaints or issues that we have, we do not get many. I'll be honest. There are times when we get people who call and say, the officer was flippant or they were rude, and that's certainly not acceptable. But that does happen. We will oftentimes address that just directly with the officer. We do have a complaint system and mechanism, and This is one of the things that, whether it's in Maplewood or anywhere I've ever been, that it takes a lot to get people to come in and sign a complaint, which the reality is by law, we need to have a signed complaint in order to initiate or move forward with a investigation against on an officer. So we don't get a lot of issues. Now, when we look at real issues in Maplewood, is there reason to be concerned about policing? Is there reason to be concerned about difference? Yes, because when we look at the outcomes that happen in policing here relative to our population, we have some really disparate outcomes. We have, and this is not, I don't think this is terribly unusual in probably most metro communities, but nonetheless, this is what I was speaking about earlier. How do we make meaning of this? How is it that in a community we have such high numbers of arrests of people of color? I mean, how does that happen? Some of that, you know, certainly is generated from police. A lot of that comes from, we have a big retail outlet here, so a lot of that stuff is things that we get because we're called in and to address it. But nonetheless, in any community, how do we begin to make meaning out of the disparate outcomes that exist? As it relates to how individuals, how a church makes a difference around this, again, I think it goes back to this is an issue for faith communities. It's how does a faith community as an integral part of any community certainly has a significant voice in terms of engaging people around key and critical issues of community safety and opening up the opportunity for dialogue. And certainly if folks don't feel like they can come here and make that complaint to me or to one of any number of elected officials that are here today from our city about a concern, then one of the vehicles, one of the places to make that happen is certainly through a faith community. That could be a conduit. So I think there are really key and critical and very explicit ways that institutions, organizations in this community, in Maplewood or any other community, can provide a mechanism, a vehicle for deeper levels of engagement. And certainly I can tell you that you're going to get responsiveness from me, and I can tell you that my bosses who are sitting out in the audience tonight are going to expect that me and the members of our police department are going to be responsive.
Now, I want to be clear. I'm all for body cams now because we need accountability, but I don't want a police force that has to wear body cameras. Those can be manipulated. It's like there's a bigger discussion that must happen, because if we need our officers to wear cameras all of the time, what the heck is that saying? What does that tell us? And you know how you can manipulate a camera. Oh, it slipped back there. Oh, I forgot to turn it on because it only charges up for 4 hours, so I gotta go back and recharge it. It still leaves room for error. There's a bigger issue. You gotta understand. If you don't understand it, like I said, we're here for police accountability. But you gotta understand, like Paul said, he has bosses. His bosses have bosses. There are certain people who control all of our movements, and we must understand that. And if we can't have a bigger discussion to realize that there are entities that structure all of these things, that structure all of it. I had students that worked at Maplewood Mall, and they would say, hey, Jason, these are black kids stealing at this mall. And I said, okay, there are black kids stealing from the mall. And I said, are there white kids stealing from the mall? And she said, not as much. And I said, are you sure? It's not being watched for as much. Just me off my presence. I could walk in a room and tennis go up. Especially if I got on like sweatpants. Don't let me have on a hoodie. Oh man. And I see people distancing themselves. Let's be honest. This is the time for us to be honest. Like I said, it hurts me to admit that I had anti-gay sentiments and that it's hard for me to be around transgender people. I'm honest in saying that. I get a funny feeling. I do. Especially, man, like, you know, and I say this reluctantly, but when I see a man who was clearly a man who's now a woman, something happens to me. It does. And I don't want to feel like that. And I don't want to be like that to someone. But it's like I get that feeling and it doesn't feel right. Like the handshake is different. I wonder what other people are thinking. I change. We need a place where we can have honest dialogue. That's what we need. That's what we're dying for. Not those conversations we have in our home where we're actually watching television and making mockery of people or laughing at people or, you know, talking about our own things we went through, and we use that to generalize an entire population. We need these discussions to happen often. Like we do, you know, some people want to take ride-alongs with law enforcement officials. We need law enforcement officials to take ride-alongs with average citizens, if that's possible. But it has to be some out-of-the-box thinking. We can't have this linear discussion saying this, and this, and everything will be fine. We have to be in constant conversation with each other. We have to go places we don't visit. We got to go to places, you know, don't only go to, you know, a church. Would you consider going to a mosque? Would you go to a Buddhist center? Where are you willing to go, and how much are you willing to give of yourself to make these things right? You must ask yourself those questions.
A couple of things come to mind, Paul, when I hear you say that there isn't a lot of phone calls in to make complaints. But then to hear that a good majority of the arrests that are being made are of people of color. In my experience working in St. Paul at the Westside Safe Neighborhood Council, and being a Latina, it's not culturally a good thing when you have to call the police. We are raised and are taught at an early age that you don't call the police. That is a sign of weakness. That is a sign of dysfunction. That is a sign that your family is out of control. And we learn ways and strategies to keep the family problems within without calling the police. So if and when I have to call the police, it's a bad situation. It's a bad situation. But what that means is that for individuals that maybe don't have a lot of the networking skills, a lot of the informational gathering skills, they're not going to call. They're not going to file a complaint. Even for me, hearing the words internal affairs, I'm not calling. And that's the reality for a lot of people of color. They're not going to make those complaints. Now, that's not to say that crime isn't lower here. That's not to say that you're not a wonderful chief, because I know that firsthand the great work that you did in St. Paul. But let's look at putting together, like you said, some sort of official mediation or a mediary where people can come independent of the police department. And I know that you could do it because you've done it informally in St. Paul. But to build in that trust factor so that when they show up, someone that looks like them is there. Not someone who is just as scary as the officer that arrested them at Maplewood Mall. So that builds in the trust factor immediately to say, you know, we're going to steer away from the more formal kind of, and let's look to resolve this a little bit more informally. When I witnessed a police officer tase and assault a teenager in front of my house, and I got a call from the person from Internal Affairs, I didn't want to answer. I was afraid. That police officer saw my face, he saw where I lived. I live on a busy intersection. All he had to do was ask, who's that woman that lives there? And 10 people could probably tell you who I was. I was afraid. So when I found out that we put together kind of a more informal network of people, chiefs, officer, I don't know what your official title was at the time, but we saw results even faster making those phone calls, aside from the formal paperwork of the Internal Affairs, and getting good results. You know, I had asked, okay, no, I don't want to see that police officer. After I seen that happen, he's the last one I want to see. But my heart went out to him because I said, he must be stressed to the point where he's assaulting kids. That's a red flag. He needs to be put on vacation. He needs some training. He needs to go to church. There are some things that we as a community need to put in place for our police officers when their stress level is that high. And unfortunately, it does not involve, a lot of the times, internal affairs. And If you've got a person who is in charge of internal affairs that maybe is friends with police officers, then it just further tarnishes the police department when people find out, well, oh, he was a police officer before, he's not gonna, that paperwork's gonna end up in the trash, and we potentially could be, targets ourselves. So I would argue that there should almost be something set up, and maybe the faith community here in Maplewood might be a good start, or regular neighbors, people who work in, mediation and conflict resolution, or the church, to kind of help bridge the gap between both sides. Because as Marie mentioned, that's where we saw the trust level build, when they could go to someone else and have someone help them in that process, because it's not easy. It's very frightening. And, that's just a suggestion that I would offer. But I want to say also that I think the bigger problem is poverty. When I worked at Head Start, I had an opportunity to take a workshop that kind of pinpointed what the behavior looks like when you grow up in poverty. And I was shocked, because I would say, as an immigrant who came here from Mexico when I was just 3 years old with my mom, we kind of changed from the lowest of the income bracket to the middle, back to the lowest, back to the middle. My parents are a little higher, I'm kind of still in the middle. But there is a direct correlation between the behaviors that you see. And when I saw the video of Ferguson, that's what I saw. That's the behavior that you see when you're growing up in poverty. When you look around and that's what you see every day of your life, you do behave a certain way. And if officers, or even us as everyday citizens, aren't kind of in tune to what that behavior looks like, that's when we stereotype. That's when we group everyone together, and no matter what group it is. But it really comes down again to you kind of saying, what can I do to learn about the bigger problem? And I'm going to say that the bigger problem is poverty.
A lot of the questions are dealing with police brutality. There's a couple questions in here that were answered with other questions that you answered. There's a couple that are pretty specific. How does a community such as this, or traditional St. Paul suburb, seek common solutions? What type of activity in the community will facilitate diverse people coming together to talk and to listen? I do believe there needs to be a connection between community and schools. And with that, I would add a part of another question, because it kind of goes along with this, about how to protect at-risk youth, and what are we doing to help them in the community?
Well, I'll start off by saying I'm a St. Paul Youth Ambassador. Now, that was an initiative created by by a number of people collaborated. YWCA, City of St. Paul Police Department, and another entity, some nonprofit organizations. But the whole goal was to deal with the crime downtown St. Paul. That was the entire initiative, and we brought together a group of great professionals who have a track record of doing great work with young people. We have Chacho, he know a lot of the West Side kids. I'm connected with a number of kids. And we were to serve as a conduit between law enforcement and the youth. And the statistics show we reduced the crime rate in our first year by, I believe, 69%. So it worked. But our relationships with law enforcement didn't get any better. They didn't. And with Metro Transit, they have the largest jurisdiction in the state of Minnesota, and they operate like SWAT. They like all over these kids, and we can't even have decent conversations with them. I'm tempted to reach out to Chief Harrington to discuss it, but it's like we're not even on a hello basis. So it's like that has to be held accountable. But that's why I say I'm losing a lot of my optimism and leaning towards pessimism, because we want to have the dialogue. But if there are not concrete things that we're willing to do, then we lose every time. So I want concrete discussions where we come up with 4 or 5 things every time to say, this is what we're going to work on. This is how we're going to interact. One day meet at the community center. One day let's meet at the schools. And even with some school resource officers, I've seen some great school resource officers. I love Vern, who's at Johnson. I love the guys out there at Chasta, Trent. I see a lot of great ones, but then I see a lot of them who are quick to tase kids. I seen a girl get tased, 14 years old, in a fight with a male. And this guy tased the girl. Didn't make sense at all. I've seen a kid get tased and just punched in the face 8 to 10 more times because he was the one with the prongs in his skin. So it's like, we do need connection between school, community, religious institutions, etc. But we got to figure out a way to have the tough discussions and not just glance over them, where we having tough discussions, but we're actually coming up with solutions. So let's try and focus more on solutions.
Can I just ask, what does that look like?
The discussion?
Yeah, no, not the discussion. Give me one of the concrete examples that you think is a walkaway, that, relative to that. I mean, I think it's helpful just for us to get a sense of it. What would be one of those concrete example walkaways?
Walkaways in terms of
solution.
I think we need to have a forum where people. What I do in some of my classes is I have students identify on index cards what's the hardest population for you to work with and why. I get a higher level of honesty by doing it on an anonymous basis and having us read it out loud to know that what we're working with. So that's one way. If we can all come in here and anonymously say what we're afraid of and which population we don't want to work with and why, I think the honesty can be in the room and we can work from that, because then we know what we have to work with. But if everybody comes in, like if I was to ask right now, who in here is racist? Or who in here is sexist? Nobody would say anything. Nobody would say, yeah, hey, I'm racist. Nobody would say, hey, I'm sexist. You know, I do it all the time. Like nobody would be willing to do that. So if we can have a level of anonymity first and then work from that, I think we can be able to have some honest dialogue.
I just want to bring it back to Maplewood real quick. I mean, Maplewood isn't perfect. We've had issues, especially issues with youth. Youth being photographed at parks because there was too many black kids. People saying, I don't want too many black kids playing basketball while I take my daughter to the park. So what does the person do? Call Parks and Recs and get those hoops taken down. The kids just took it as, oh, business as usual. And why are our kids taking that? What message are they getting that this is okay for people to do that to them? To say, you can't play here because you're a certain color or somebody's scared of you, and then to be quiet about it until I find out? And it makes me upset because those are my sons, that's my son and his friends, and they're good kids. So I sat down with Parks and Rec, police chief, and said, you will bring them back. And they brought them back. But let's talk about the bigger issue. When we talk about community, like I'm from St. Paul. I grew up in the neighborhood house. We got to go there whenever we wanted. Hot plate, food. It was a community place. I knew that somebody upstairs, if I was acting crazy, that person would tell my mom, hey, you know what, So we knew how to conduct ourselves. But, you know, if we want to talk about community, I mean, our geographic itself, Maplewood, it's kind of weird. It's like an upside down L. We don't have a congregational place where we hang out. But we have a community center. It says community center on it. But yet, if you can't pay $200 a month to be a part of that community center and take advantage of the amenities, the pools, the basketball, where do you think our youth are going to go? I live in Maplewood. Why do I have to go to Battle Creek and put my daughter or son in those places when we have a community center here? Why do I have to? So a lot of our business day-to-day things, I've even taken it and said, well, I lived here for 15 years, just taking it too. That I can't take a part of that community center, my son can't play in there during the winter breaks, and they're stuck at home or they're walking around with their backpacks, being, like I said, people, oh, there's too many black kids around here. And let's be real and talk, people are scared of youth because of the media, because of the propaganda that's always said, these black youth, these Mexican youth, they're hostile, you know, so we have to talk about this, that this is an everyday reality. So if we're gonna talk about this, we have to authentically, and use words like, you know, white supremacy, institutional, systemic racism. That happens in our police departments, happens in our community. Because my son still is not able to go to Maplewood Community Rec Center. And it's a year ago since I went and spoke to Parks and Recs. You know, why is that? You know, so where does he go? He goes to Battle Creek, he goes to Conway. We're community members, and yet we still can't take advantage of a community center in Maplewood. So that needs to change. Either we have to find funding or money. We have to put we have to invest in our children. Because to say they're the problem is to be false and not to look at yourself and say, we are part of the problem. We're not investing in them. We're not nurturing them. We're not telling them. We're not a community anymore. We're not. That's that kid over there. I mean, we just kind of shoo them away like we have no responsibility to them, and we do. So, I mean, I know that Chief Schnell wanted to put together a youth program, and it fell through because we didn't have enough money for it, but we still have to keep charging ahead. We need to bring in our youth. We need to teach them about respect, self-respect, history, and what people are told to think about youth of color, you know? And some of them just, some of them don't, are out there, don't know who to trust, don't have a positive role model, and might end up in the criminal justice system. Most likely if you're Mexican and you're black, you will end up in the criminal justice system. You will be stopped by police. So we have to get with the solutions, but we have to say, okay, Chanel, Maplewood is going to be on the forefront. And this is what we want to try with the Maplewood Police. We have to ask our mayor, our city council members, what are you guys willing to do to help us bring this to fruition? To say, this is our Maplewood plan. And hopefully everybody else watching will say, wow, they did a good model. But we have to really take it back. I mean, this is an ugly subject in itself, and we can't, it's almost time to go. And we're not going to solve our problems. So it takes more discussion, it takes more forums, and people to not be so scared to talk about race, because the issue is race. How people are stopped or people are treated based on race, class, where you live, who they think you are because of the perceptions of your people of color. So we have to talk about that in an authentic way, and it's going to hurt. People might hear, maybe if I just said white supremacy, I'm sure some of you guys are like, what? What did she just say? It's a reality. And so to skate around that, we're not doing anyone justice. We're not doing people who took their time out today to figure out what can we do. So I urge us to really keep us talking, but we have to find some solutions and, put Chanel on the carpet. You have 55 police officers. How many are Asians? 4? 5? How many are Latino? None. How many are Native American? Somali. Let's start here. Especially if we have a chief willing to say that. I mean, take this on. This is where it starts. And, you've always told us, commissioners, to hold you accountable. Let's hold them accountable. And our mayor's here and our city council members are here. We have to work together. It's not just a Chief Snell thing. It's not a me thing or a commission thing. It's us getting together and say, what are you willing to bring to the table? That's what has to happen. And, us, yeah, we're all busy, but we have to commit to this, because a lot of it happens, especially in the Black and Latino communities. Everybody comes and promises the world, and yet they always get to leave and leave us just kind of, wait a minute, I thought you were going to help us. You get to leave and you don't get to come back, or failed promises or broken promises. We've had enough of that. So it's really hard to trust police. It's really hard to trust somebody who wants to do great good for the community, but when you say all lip service and then nothing comes through, you just, then again, a long list of hope or failed dreams, or dang, I thought they were really serious this time. So we don't want that in our community. We don't want that for people. We've been through enough, and we are still going through a lot of things with police. And like Martha said, it's very scary. I mean, we've dealt with a lot of people. We shielded a lot of people from the St. Paul police because they were scared that they'd be retaliated against. So me and Martha acted like a shield to shield our community members from retaliation or to know their name, because it's scary. And sometimes even we get called out. Just because we're willing to go to bat for a certain part of the community, then the police officers turn to us, you're just like them. It's like, why can't I love police officers and respect them, which I do, but why can't I love my community and respect my community? It's not to choose all or nothing, and that's sometimes how I feel. Like, if we want to talk about bad police, oh, you hate cops. No. Why does it have to be all or nothing? And, we need to move past that, common solutions. So, anybody, what solutions we can start writing down and get to.
Let's go really quick here, just a couple minutes for each person to kind of closing statements, and if if that could be a solution, that would be awesome as well. So
Sure.
2 minutes each for each speaker.
Yep, I would say I have a solution, a concrete solution, to kind of look at just very simply the geographic boundaries of Maplewood, kind of look at the different types of housing. So if we've got housing complexes in a certain part of Maplewood, start looking at the correlation between crime, arrests. Is there a pattern? Are we seeing certain pockets of Maplewood kind of experience higher levels of crime than others? Start looking at the issues very simply. Who lives there? What are their issues? Because there is a correlation between higher police services and poverty, low-income communities of color. What can we do to help? And that's, you each can think of, I'm sure, 5 things off the top of your head. Whether that's donating food, volunteering at the school, getting to know your neighbors, playing with the kids, volunteering to coach. I mean, there's a long list of things that you can do, but something that's comfortable for you. If you each have a skill set that you bring, I'm sure some of you in here could offer that time and talent to a child that may not have a mother and a father at home for good reasons. Mom may be working 2 jobs to pay the rent. That doesn't make them a bad family. That doesn't make him or her a bad kid. You can offer, you can be that supportive adult. Each child needs 7 supportive adults involved in their lives outside of their family. Be one of that 7.
Thank you.
I just ask you to do the work. Be honest about who you are, about your biases that you hold, the critiques you have of others, what you're willing to accept, what are you willing to do to make a change. Sitting, watching your television or having discussions on Facebook is not enough. I mean, a lot of people want to run to Facebook and say how they feel about certain issues. Come to a forum. Have the courage to talk. Have the courage to talk to somebody who doesn't look like you, who might have one of her job, someone who is Muslim. Be willing to look at yourself and say, where am I causing an injustice in someone else's life? And that's where we start the work. Be honest about who you are, your implicit biases, your explicit biases, and then be able to, be the change that you wish to see. Thank you.
Going back to the training, I think mandatory training that includes culture competency as a part of being a part of the FTO training. When it comes to systemic change, you have Band-Aid work, you have stitch work, and you also have internal surgery work. And so until you have a system that works the way you want to, there should be accountability and having community members be able to ride along with officers, but also having officers be able to engage in other activities in the community outside of law enforcement. So it just isn't civilians riding along with officers in the street, but it's also officers going alongside community programming. Even though it's not perfect, I still think that body cams and recording devices, until we have a system that works well, is an important way of holding officers accountable. But I do think we need more officers, not just those assigned to bike patrol, not just those assigned to certain schools, but officers that are assigned or rotated through all of these different things and what it means to be holistic, having community development individuals come into departments and work alongside police officers. Thank you.
I agree with what was all said. I maintain a degree of optimism about where we are and where we're going. And I know that Jason and I had this conversation just a couple of weeks ago, and I really honestly believe that there is reason for hope, because I do think that ultimately it is grounded in all of these things of, I think, starting with looking at where we all sit ourselves. As we begin to think about, as we're hiring officers, we're trying to get a better sense of who they are. We've been trying to, we've had young people sit in our hiring panels, youth sit on our hiring panels, because we find they have incredible insight into where these officers sit and potential officers sit. I do believe that, just out of tonight, I heard a lot of things that I think would provide some really interesting mechanisms for a community like Maplewood or any community around how it is that we expand access, that we perhaps reduce some of the fear people have in terms of coming forward. We need to get young people more interested in law enforcement. I get that for a lot of folks, especially from some communities of color, thinking about working in law enforcement as you lived is something that is is really challenging. And we need more women to work in law enforcement. We know that in this department we certainly would like to see more women. We'd like to see a broader representation, especially as the demographics in our community are changing. We want to be more reflective and responsive to the community that we serve. For me, what comes out of tonight is we certainly have a lot of the things that have been talked about here tonight, whether it's body camera, systems of accountability, mechanisms to try and debrief incidents that our officers were involved in, really trying to work on transparency when it matters, doubling down on that. We've had some relatively recent incidents where we've had to do that, and we have done things that were not traditionally would not have been accepted because of the active investigation nature of a case. We would not have done the things that we did, but we felt in light of the things that were happening in the community, in light of the things that were happening across the country, it was important that we double down in terms of transparency, and when things become more difficult, that we engage in those really difficult situations. And that stems from an in-custody death that we had here in Maplewood not that long ago. And there are always difficult situations to deal with. We want the officers in Maplewood to know that as a community, and you all, I think, here, need to be clear about, and I've heard it loud and clear tonight. I certainly hear it from my bosses that they expect much of our police officers, and they should, given the level of authority that our officers have, and given the investment that the city makes in them and in their training. And at the same time, I think there has been a commitment to try and help develop them, make us better. And we are doing more to create systems of accountability. And that accountability is not just to get or nick a con. It is about how do we get better? How do we have the difficult conversations about how something like that happens? How do we have the difficult conversation about the fact that we arrest way more kids of color in this community than are represented who live in this community? How does that happen? And those are challenging conversations, but conversations that have to happen. I agree with Jason, and we want to be a part of that solution. And I hear loud and clear, Marie, your interest in terms of saying, look, there's got to be more than lip service. In a few weeks, I'll just close with this, in a few weeks we'll be presenting a plan, our policing strategy for 2015, based in large part on feedback we received from people in this community. And I think based on some of the conversations, some of the questions that we received tonight, and certainly for those people who didn't feel that you had a chance to be heard, I'll be around tonight, and I know some of our elected folks are here. If that's something you want to talk about, I'm sure some of these panelists who were great would be around. But we want to make sure that when we present that in a few weeks, February 2 of the council, that it will include some specific kind of measurable outcomes related to the conversation tonight. Because if we do that, I think that is how we bring traction to an hour and a half plus of conversation. And then the city council and all of you and the people who pay the bill here can hold me and the officers accountable to ensure that those things happen. So I thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this, and I appreciate all of you coming.
Great. I just want to echo the thanks there. I really appreciate all the speakers coming out today and taking the time. Really appreciate that. and all of you, the community members that made it out here today. It's really important to have that civic dialogue, and you made it a point to come out tonight and came out, so thank you. Quick plug just on these community listening sessions. The Human Rights Commission likes to do many of these. This is something that we're trying to do more of. So if you have topics or ideas, we meet the second Tuesday of the month here in this room. And we are actually, I think we have 2 openings on the commission. So if this is something you're very passionate about, or if you're passionate about any topics for the city of Maplewood, apply and come sit up here with us and let your voice be heard. So, or if you're just not that interested and you just want to come and speak and listen, you can do that as well. So that will close out the community listening session piece. Next item is commissioner comments or administrative presentations. All right. Any visitor presentations? We have one. Councilman June. Oh. 5 minutes, maybe? Oh, you had it.
Never mind, I have a lot.
There you go.
I'm Kathleen Newman, City Council member and liaison to this commission, and I just wanted to introduce myself to some of you because I haven't been to the last couple of meetings, so that's my main reason for being here. And to thank the panel members for coming tonight, and also to thank this commission for trying to get us focused on issues that affect everybody. And just for your edification, Marie, the community center isn't open to anyone that doesn't pay the money. It isn't a racial issue, it's a money issue. And that's a big, long topic we could talk about for a long time.
Oh yeah, I know it's not a racial issue, it's an income issue, and we can't get into that. But it marginalizes a certain part of the community that can't afford
Actually,
to be
it's,
there.
I've had that same complaint from a number of middle-class people who don't feel they can afford it. So that's another whole issue in Parks and Rec about whether
Right,
we
we
rec
can do that
centers
later.
instead of that particular piece. But anyway, I just want to know who I was, and I'm your liaison if you need me. My phone number is on everything that goes out. I couldn't escape if I tried. But I wanted to introduce myself, and I thought tonight was a good night to be here. I've tried twice before and fanked out. Here I am. And if you want me in between,
Thank you.
Thank you for visitor presentation. I'm Nora Slavic, I'm the mayor of Maplewood. I want to thank Nate and the Human Rights Commission for putting us on. I especially want to thank Marie. We've been talking about things for a long time, and I appreciate your frankness, and I think that you need to continue to push us, and you know that. Maplewood is a city, it's long and wide, and does not have a great sense of community. So these conversations are important. I want to thank the speakers. I thank Martha with the 1 and 7, and Jason with the Be the Change You Want to See, which is, who said that? Gandhi, right? And Band-Aids and the stitches and things. So you all were great. And our community needs more of it. We know how fortunate we are to have Chief Schnell, of course. And I come to these commissions when I can. This is the first time that I have been here. So I just want to thank you for volunteering as commissioners. We do have the 2 openings, so I do hope we can get a couple more folks here. And thanks, our community needs this, so much appreciated.
Thank you. Any other commissioner visitor presentations? Great.
Nate, could I just add that I feel like any effective system of accountability also needs to look at recognition and best practices. So not just saying, oh, things are great, but really looking deep into some of the issues and find out what went right with that. How did that work and how can we replicate it? So I know it's easier to identify all of the serious issues, but I know, Martha, you spoke to how important it was when Chief Schnell showed up and what a big difference I heard from you that made to that situation and to you. And so if we can really look deep into what went well and what are those best practices, I think that needs to be part of the bigger system of accountability for all of us.
Great.
Nate, I'd just like to add that someone once said, for every complicated social problem, there's a simple solution, and it won't work. I think if we acknowledge that the problems that we're talking about tonight are complicated and they'll take complicated solutions. It's also going to take a village. The police department can't solve the problems that we're talking about tonight. I really appreciate the panel's effort to identify the problems and come up with so many solutions that I heard here this evening. And with it takes a village concept, I appreciate everybody that was here tonight. The solution is going to come from the community.
Thanks. All right, if there's no more presentation or comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Anyone?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
If I end up on YouTube, I'm going to be upset.